Hey everybody, hope you guys are doing good today. I just wanted to ask a question to you guys. Do you think that we can choose God? This is a question that certainly I was thinking about a lot as a philosophy minor when I was in school. Can we choose God? We are fallen. This is something we all agree with. We have lost sanctifying grace. The intellect has been darkened. So how do we return to God? And then how do we also balance this with the fact that the unmoved mover is contingent on nothing? There is nothing that God could depend on. We are entirely dependent on God. And so freedom, of course, you might think, am I asking about free will? Well, I believe freedom is being in God, being in a state of grace, being free from your carnal impulses. That is what freedom is. It's being able to share in the life of God, to share in eternal concepts, and to share in the good, to share in beauty. And these are things that are only possible through theosis. All right, but what about choosing God? Because obviously people are not born Christians. We are born in a fallen state. We're born with original sin. So how does that work? And this is something that theologians have been going back and forth on for quite some time. There's first a distinction between what you call monogism and synergism. Synergism says that we have to cooperate with God's grace. So God, he gives everyone what's called actual graces, and these actual graces kind of push us on the outside. They could be just growing up in a Christian family. They could be meeting someone who's a Christian missionary, whatever it might be. An actual grace is something that pushes you from the outside. And then we, in our own freedom, have to cooperate, and this is a freedom of indifference, have to cooperate with those graces. And so there's a synergy together. We can't resist the great Holy Spirit, and then we will accept baptism and the sacraments. And this is a view I held for most of my life, I'd say. But as I've really began to dig deeper into the implications of realism and the implications of the fact that God is, again, contingent on nothing, that we are entirely dependent on God, it doesn't seem that we can, in fact, choose God. It seems that God is the one who's actualizing everything. And evil is just the lack of God's actualizing certain potentials. Again, everything has act and potency. Go back to my video with Aquinas analysis if you forgot what those terms mean. God is the unactualized actualizer. He's actualizing everything that has being. And so for us to choose God, this seems like an actualization that God himself has to actualize. And so it seems to me that monergism, which is to say that God is the one who is pushing us, he is the one who has really done the first work. We are dead, and God is the one. We're not just like sick and we have to like take the medicine, but we're actually dead. And God is the one who has to bring us back to life. And so then the question is, of course, how does God choose those who he wants to save? And this is called unconditioned election. This is something that I think Calvinists have termed. And you might be surprised to hear that the Catholic Church, particularly Thomas Aquinas, actually agree with this principle of unconditioned election. Now, where we differ with the Calvinist is in what's called double predestination. According to, I think, a lot of Calvinists, some people are predestined to be the elect, those who will be saved, those who God will give sanctifying grace to, and those who are the reprobate, those who will go to hell. But Catholics, we don't believe that God will send anyone to hell. That would be evil. God doesn't want anyone to go to hell. And so what it is, in fact, is we send ourselves to hell through our own sinful nature, through our own sinfulness, that we ourselves have chosen. When we lack the sanctifying grace, when we lack being in part union with God, we just naturally choose to do something that is evil. I don't actually like the term natural, because we are naturally made in sin and grace, but we just choose, just basically this is our modus operandi at birth, to choose to do evil things. Our general maxim is one that's disoriented away from that which is good and that which is the natural law. And for that reason, we send ourselves to hell. And so those who are saved saved only through the grace of God. We entirely deserve none of that. So those who are saved only because of the grace of God acting entirely upon us. And so it is God who is doing the first work to save us, but God does not damn anyone, we damn ourselves. Okay, so that's an important principle. Now the next question is, how does God unconditionally elect us? And that is the question. How is it an unconditional election? And St. Augustine said that, frankly, we don't know. Then Romans 9 says that God is the potter, we are the clay. He gets to choose who he wants to save, give sanctifying grace to. Perhaps he wants to give it to them only for a certain amount of time. And for whatever reason, it is according to his sovereign will. Now that's what the Thomas Aquinas Thomist would say. This is also what the Augustinians would say, is that God has his reasons that are just beyond our comprehension, since we can only see in a very two-dimensional sense. We can only see linearly and backwards. We can't see, from a bird's eye view, all the connections and what have you. We know that God is just, we know that he is good, and so for whatever reason it is, it must work out for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Personally, while this may be true, I'm inclined to think that God would like to save everyone, like he said. He says he wants to save everyone, and so I have a harder time accepting this view. And so I accept instead a view called Molinism. Molinism was a theological approach to predestination that was developed later on, and it says that the unconditional election is unconditioned insofar as we haven't done anything. However, God has set a constraint on himself. So God is basically, there's what's called his natural knowledge. There's three kinds of knowledge that I'll get into. The first kind is the natural knowledge, which is the knowledge of all possible worlds. So God is restricted by his own nature being necessary truths, truths of mathematics, truths of logic, because God is the source of all orderliness, all goodness. So he's bound by certain necessary truths. So he has a knowledge of all possible worlds. And then a subset of these possible worlds is what's called middle knowledge. And these are contingent realities, but that God complies with. So God, who wants us to choose him, he wants us to have a sense of freedom. And so he creates what's called a counterfactual world. And in this counterfactual world, it is a world where we do in fact have a freedom of indifference. And so God, since he can see into the future, he can create any hypothetical reality he wants. He creates some hypothetical reality in which we have now the ability to choose. And so if given the choice, how would we react? That is the question. And so God, based on how we react, this is our middle knowledge, in these counterfactual situations, he now has a new set of possible worlds in which to actualize. For example, he knows in which worlds, if given a chance, the Virgin Mary would say yes to the Annunciation, to say yes to being the Christ child, the Theotokos, the bearer of the incarnate God. And so, based on that, now God has a certain number of worlds, a subset of that, in which to actualize. And in which now, based on that constraint. And so we have these varying constraints. First, you have the constraint of logic, which is a necessary truth, and then you have a constraint of contingent truths, which God abides by. And so then you have now a new set of worlds that God could actualize. And then God chooses which world to actualize, based on what's called his free knowledge. And so that's the last thing, is free knowledge, in which God chooses which world to actualize. This also explains the role of prayer. In the Thomistic view, prayer is I would say, is more for our own good, whereas in the Molinistic view, prayer makes more sense because God can see, okay, given the fact that this guy has prayed for example, that he would have the grace to resist certain temptation, I now have, based on that constraint, these new sets of possible worlds, and now I can choose the set of possible worlds in which he does in fact resist that temptation. And so God, in his foreknowledge, since he knows everything before it happens, and his sovereign knowledge, that is, he's the one who's going to actualize everything, he can in fact now comply with an understanding of human freedom, of indifference. But now, how does this mean for us? You may be wondering, how does this make sense for us? And the answer to that is, we as we live life in this very spatial temporal world, we can't see basically what door we'll go through, so to speak. We don't know which door we'll choose, and even if it's the door that we perhaps in some counterfactual did choose to go through, and God's the one who actualized it, whatever that might be, we have to always live life with the assumption of kind of a freedom. We have to live life in this assumption that we can choose God, only so far as we don't psych ourselves out. Once we choose God, we have to recognize that it's God who chose us, but we also don't want to psych ourselves out. We don't want to be like, oh, well, maybe God just didn't choose me, and then I won't do anything about it. That kind of attitude is very destructive, and you don't want to have that. You definitely don't want to have that attitude. So we kind of have to presuppose, in a sense, a freedom of indifference, just so that we can live life how we were meant to live life. So you don't psych yourself out, like I'm saying. That is important to remember. But at this kind of metaphysical, cosmic level, I think Molinism to me makes the most sense when it comes to a can we choose God narrative. And the answer is no, God chooses us. And he chooses who to save based on some other counterfactual in which we do have freedom of indifference, a freedom to choose God, and then he sees which people would choose God based in this counterfactual world. That to me seems to be a very reasonable option, and there's much debate though. There was much debate between the Thomist and the Molinist. Famous Molinist are William Lane Craig. There's a lot of famous Thomists out there, and they go head to head, and there's a lot of theological debate and philosophical discussion that I really maybe eventually get into the weeds with, but for now I'm very comfortable saying that it's one of those things you can only dig so far before you hit bedrock when it comes to predestination and understanding God's foreknowledge. And I think that to me this seems to be a very reasonable option given a realist picture of the world. Perhaps if I was an idealist like Berkeley, or a Christian idealist, or perhaps like a transcendental idealist like Kant, then you could have a much more synergistic view of things. But being a realist, believing that God is the one who's actualizing all being, given the fact that we're fallen creatures, it seems to me that God has to choose us. Why does he choose us? Maybe based on some counterfactual world in which we could choose him. That seems to me to be a very reasonable alternative. Let me know what you think in the comment section below, and definitely do more research on this. It's a very interesting subject that I think doesn't get a lot of attention as it should. I think a lot of people have been sleeping on this subject, so definitely let me know what you think in the comment section below. It was good talking about this. I'll see you guys in the next video.